The upgrade does not happen when you add more to your personality, it happens when you remove what never belonged there. I want to start here because most people misunderstand growth. We are taught that improving ourselves means adding things, new habits, new behaviors, new ways of speaking, and for a while that feels productive. It feels like movement. But over time, something feels off. You start to notice that you are doing a lot, yet feeling very little. You are more aware of yourself, but not more settled, more active, but not more grounded. That is usually the first sign that growth is pointing in a different direction. When I began paying attention, I noticed that the people who felt the most stable were not trying very hard to project anything. They were not carefully managing how they came across. They were not rushing to clarify themselves. They were simply present in the moment they were in. There was nothing sharp about them, nothing performative, and yet you felt them. When you look at women who lead with real authority, a pattern becomes obvious. The most respected ones are rarely the most reactive. They do not rush to fill space. They do not explain themselves into safety. They stay centered and let the room adjust. Take Indra Nooyi, former CEO of PepsiCo. In high-pressure boardrooms, she was known for her calm composure. When challenged, she did not raise her voice or over-justify her decisions. She listened fully, responded precisely, and stopped. That restraint carried weight. People paid attention not because she demanded it, but because she was not negotiating her position moment by moment. Or consider Angela Merkel. For years, she led one of the most powerful countries in the world without theatrics. No dramatic speeches, no emotional swings. She paused before answering. She tolerated silence, and under pressure, she became quieter, not louder. That steadiness made her presence intimidating in a way that was hard to name. She did not dominate rooms, she anchored them. Then there is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She rarely reacted in real time. When criticized or disagreed with, she did not defend herself emotionally. She chose her moments carefully. When she spoke, it was measured and deliberate. There was no urgency to be understood. Her authority came from clarity, not volume. What all of these women shared was not charisma in the traditional sense. They were not trying to win rooms. They were not managing perception moment by moment. They had already done the internal work. Their confidence was not something they turned on. It was something that stayed because nothing inside them was fighting for control. They did not need to prove themselves because they were no longer questioning themselves. That is when it became clear to me that a lot of what we call personality is actually habit. Habits formed from needing to fit in, from wanting to be understood, from learning when to speak and when to stay quiet based on other people's reactions. Those habits are not wrong, they are understandable, but they are not permanent. At some point, growth becomes less about becoming someone new and more about letting go of what you no longer need. The extra explanations, the unnecessary reactions, the quiet pressure to be liked. When those things soften, something else comes forward. A calmer way of being, a steadier presence, not louder, just clearer. And that clarity changes how people experience you. Not because you demand attention, but because you are no longer pulling it toward yourself. That is what this video is about, not becoming more, but becoming aligned, not performing confidence, but uncovering it. Let me take you into a moment most people recognize, even if they have never named it. You walk into a room, could be work, could be a social setting, nothing intense, just people talking, sharing opinions, filling the space. And without trying to analyze it, you can usually sense who is settled and who is not. Some people speak quickly, almost as if they are racing the silence. Others keep adjusting their tone, their posture, their expressions, checking how they are landing. You can feel the effort behind their words. And then there is sometimes one person who is different. They are not trying to win the conversation. They are not trying to disappear either. They listen. They respond when it makes sense. They are not in a hurry to arrive anywhere. There is no tension around them. And that absence of tension is what draws attention. I used to think that kind of presence was something you are born with, that some people just have it and others do not. But that is not true. What looks like natural confidence is usually the result of someone no longer fighting themselves. Most people are fighting internally all the time, wondering how they are coming across, thinking about what to say next, trying to avoid looking unsure. That internal noise leaks out. You can feel it even if you cannot explain it. Quiet confidence shows up when that noise settles. Let me explain this in a simple way. Most people think confidence is about mindset. Like, if you think differently, you'll feel confident. If you say the right things to yourself, you'll show up better. That's not really how it works. What you're actually feeling in those moments is your internal system reacting, your body, your attention, your nervous system. When that system feels unstable, your mind starts scanning. You start checking yourself. How am I coming across? Did that land right? Should I say more? Should I clarify? And none of that is wrong. It's just automatic. But that's why confidence feels inconsistent for most people. It depends on the room, on the people, on the pressure. Some days you feel solid, other days you don't even recognize yourself. That's not a discipline issue, that's a regulation issue. When your internal system is calm, you don't have to manage yourself so much. You're not fighting the moment. Silence doesn't feel awkward. Disagreement doesn't feel like a threat. You're not rushing to fix how you're being perceived. From the outside, people call that confidence. From the inside, it just feels settled. And this is why techniques don't last. You can memorize what to say. You can practice how to stand. You can even rehearse being calm. But the moment pressure shows up, your system takes over. And whatever hasn't been stabilized internally leaks out. The shift happens when you stop trying to control your behavior and start stabilizing what's underneath it. When that happens, you naturally say less, you pause more, you listen fully, not because you're trying to look confident, but because nothing inside you is rushing anymore. That's the real change. Confidence stops being something you turn on. It becomes how you show up when nothing is being managed. And that's why it feels intimidating, because it's rare. There is also a quiet decision that happens at this stage, a decision to stop living in fluctuations, to stop accepting that confidence comes and goes based on mood, energy, or approval, to stop treating presence like something fragile that disappears the moment pressure enters the room. That decision is not loud, it does not announce itself, but it changes how you listen to yourself. You begin to notice when you give your center away, when you over-explain, when you tense unnecessarily. And instead of correcting it outwardly, you recalibrate inwardly. This is where ownership begins. Not ownership over others, ownership over your internal state. When you take responsibility at that level, confidence stops being reactive, authority stops depending on attention, and calm becomes your default rather than your exception. This is the point where most people either drift back to old patterns or commit to internal alignment fully. Because from here on, you cannot unsee it. You know that who you are in the room is not determined by the room. It is determined by how stable your internal system is when the room pushes back. And once that becomes clear, there is no going back to surface level growth. It does not come from knowing exactly what to say. It comes from being okay even if you say very little. Here is a simple example. Think about a time someone challenged you. Maybe they questioned your decision or disagreed with you publicly. The instinctive response is to defend, to explain your reasoning, to make sure they see your side. Now imagine responding differently. You listen, you acknowledge their point, you calmly say that you still stand by your decision, and then you stop. No tension, no edge, no need to win. That moment feels uncomfortable at first, especially if you are used to explaining yourself. But something interesting happens. The dynamic shifts. The other person often softens or backs off or changes tone. Not because you dominated them, but because you did not give away your center. that is what people respond to. Alpha presence is not about asserting control, it is about not losing it. As you grow into this, you will notice something else. You start choosing your words more carefully, not because you are afraid, but because you no longer feel the need to say everything. You become comfortable leaving things unsaid, and that changes how conversations feel. There is more space, more listening, less urgency. People may not immediately understand what is different about you, but they will feel it. They will slow down around you. They will pay closer attention. Not because you demand respect, but because your energy invites it. This is the part most people miss. Confidence is not something you project outward. It is something you stop interrupting. When you remove the constant checking, the self-correction, the urge to perform, what remains feels solid. And that solidity is rare in a world that is constantly reacting. You do not need to announce this change. You do not need to explain it. In fact, explaining it too much would undo it. You let it show up quietly in how you pause, in how you listen, in how you respond without rush. Over time, people adjust, and that is the real upgrade, not becoming someone louder or sharper, but becoming someone steadier, someone who is no longer pulled in every direction by the room. From here, the conversation naturally deepens because once you understand this shift, you start noticing where your energy leaks and, more importantly, how to bring it back. The people who resonate with this work usually aren't looking for motivation. They already know how to push themselves. What they're missing is clarity. Their effort is there, their ability is there, but something inside feels inconsistent. Some days they show up strong, other days they don't recognize themselves. That inconsistency doesn't come from a lack of discipline, it comes from an unstable internal system. This is what my work is centered around. I focus on helping people understand how their internal world actually operates, how thoughts are generated, how decisions are made under pressure, why presence shifts from one room to another, and how retraining that internal system changes the way you show up without forcing anything. When the internal system becomes stable, confidence stops feeling situational, presence stops fluctuating, authority doesn't collapse when attention or pressure increases. That is the difference between performing confidence and owning it. Everything I share here comes back to that. Not tricks, not techniques, but internal alignment holds. If this felt familiar, then you're already closer to that shift than you think.
This is the Pranjal Jain, waiting for you to meet your alpha self. Stay consistent. Keep upgrading your internal world. If direction needs adjustment, adjust it with awareness, but keep your grip on the destination. Your alpha self is already waiting for you. Step up now.